Hi, everyone. I'm Diane Brady. I am here with David Deans, who is a senior writer on the tech team doing investigations. Just did a terrific piece, of course, on Sam Bankman-Fried. David, welcome.
Hi, Diane. Thanks for having
And
me.
tell us a bit more about what you found.
So, just like the rest of the world, especially the crypto and tech ecosystems, with my colleagues Sarah, Emerson, and other members of the tech team, we were able to take a look at what has happened in the past week, and it's been chaos, to put it bluntly. Trying to understand exactly how a company, the second largest crypto exchange in the world, has become insolvent and filed for bankruptcy in the space of a week, has been a great challenge. But we've been making efforts to speak to as many sources as possible, and that resulted in our story that we published on Saturday.
What was it that set off alarm bells for you to get involved?
Well, Diane, last week was rather startling for anyone in the crypto world and the tech sector more broadly. Like many others, myself and my colleagues were looking at what was happening with FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried last week, and it just felt like one headline after another that was coming out to show that this company was effectively imploding. And we started to make a lot of calls to people who were at Alameda Research, which was the hedge fund trading arm of
Mm-hmm.
FTX. And we first focused there to see what we could find out about what may have triggered the events that occurred last week. As a result of all the work we were doing last week, we started speaking to a number of folks who worked shoulder to shoulder with Sam Bankman-Fried over the years, and also his other executives. And what emerged was that there was a number of red flags actually that many people, including the people who often we look up to as including investors, were all rather duped by some of the things that Sam had done over the years.
Well, when you think about the investors, their names like Sequoia, SoftBank, Ontario Teacher Pension Plan. I mean, these are not companies that tend to just throw money around lightly. Was there a particular reason? Did they ignore the red flags, or were they not evident until after they were involved?
I think this is a really clear case of investors being terrified of FOMO, fear of missing out. And we've seen that happen before with other, tech implosions. We could start talking about Theranos, for example. A lot of people threw a lot of money at that company without doing the due diligence that was necessary to find out, whether it was a legitimate firm. And it appears that the same thing has happened here with FTX, where, today there was a former SoftBank executive was talking about the fact that he was reflecting on the fact that yes, he was among many that were caught up in FOMO, and that was because there was an idea about FTX that it was the next big thing, and that it was successfully raising billions of dollars from all of these rather, smart, intelligent, qualified investors. And so once you start seeing big name brands like Sequoia, SoftBank, and Temasek and Tiger jumping into these rounds, it's like, well, we've all got to get in. But what happened that Sam Bankman-Fried did successfully was he created a fear among investors that if they questioned him too much, then he would ice them out of further and future funding rounds. And that's what a lot of reporting has focused on this week and last week. And we saw that's actually something that happened in the. Sorry, let me start again.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we saw was that actually, as a result of this environment that Sam Bankman-Fried was able to cultivate, he was able to build a company worth $32 billion without ever having a board that had any investors on it. And there was an advisory board, which some investors pointed to that they were involved in, but it had no, clear oversight of the company. And this is kind of unheard of, really, among a lot of companies that try and raise money. They have to have boards. Investors have to see into the company and they have to know what's going on. And that just was not the case here. And there was one investor who told us, in our story that we reported on Saturday, was that they looked at the financial sheets, they looked at the balance sheet, they looked at the financials, and they all appeared to be great. I mean, the company was generating revenue, so like, why would you ask more questions? And
As did Bernie Madoff's company, not to make false, accusations here. But, one thing I think that is intriguing, I know the title of your piece is "The Devil in Nerd's Clothing." And so let's start with the fact of, in terms of being from central casting, Sam Bankman-Fried did sort of fit the type to be a billionaire. For you, were there particular interviews he did that you thought, okay, this doesn't smell right?
Yeah, there was one interview that he gave that we focused on in our story, which we just thought was incredibly illustrative. And it was a conversation he had with Bloomberg's Matt Levine, where he was trying to describe yield farming, and it was a rather sort of chaotic, convoluted way of describing it. But then he provided a metaphor of how his company Alameda Research had effectively, it was a metaphorical black box that just kept providing crypto yields, and it just kept making money. But there was nothing in the box. All that mattered was that it was kept making money. And when Matt Levine pointed out that maybe, does this mean that you're in the Ponzi business? There was another interaction before Sam Bankman-Fried actually said, I think that's a reasonable, understanding. And basically he did not disagree. And so maybe we're like putting a lot of attention on a singular interaction, but it is a telling response.
I think it is. It does raise the question when you're in the realm of crypto, which we know, doesn't have the central bank. It's decentralized. It, obviously started as anonymity being a selling point. Was it just a caveat emptor realm where, you come in and that this can eviscerate quickly, or were there particular things that Sam did that really sort of went beyond what you'd expect anyone in the crypto space to be doing? I mean, let's talk about his lobbying in Washington, for example, because that's something you lay out in the story as well.
Another thing that provided this sort of genius image of Sam Bankman-Fried, and the reason why a lot of investors went on to trust him, and why customers went on to trust him, and his employees especially, believed in what he was saying, was because he did things that seemed to also go against the grain. Like, he was a huge proponent of lobbying Washington, and as part of the millions of dollars that he spent on the 2022 midterms, which Forbes previously reported was around $39 million, which is a lot of money for an individual. This led to him making calls for transparency in the crypto sector, which was and more regulation of the crypto sector, which was a different message that was being sent by the majority of the sector. And that seemed to sort of go against the grain there. The other thing that also happened was that he would make huge donations to charities, and he also, put a lot of money into sponsoring sports teams and marketing in that realm. And a lot of this had to do with his involvement with the Center for Effective Altruism, which was a group of luminaries and philosophers who want to, do good in the world and donate most of their wealth to the rest of the world. And, a lot of the things that he did was to try and make as much money as he could so that he could donate more money. And that was sort of like the thinking that underpinned apparently a lot of his investments and charitable giving. But, as we've seen in the last week, like at Miami Heat Stadium, they've started tearing down FTX logos from its arena. So there's just been we're seeing a lot of people take the FTX sign off the shop front, and we're only going to see more of that happen.
How the mighty fall. Let me ask you, because you cover a lot of these characters, some of whom are well-meaning and go down with the ship, some of whom are perhaps, more cunning. Where does Sam Bankman-Fried fall in that category for you? When you look at him as just a genotype that you cover, are there any things that stand out to you that either would have said, aha, I want to take a closer look at this guy, or you think might exonerate him as someone who was well-meaning but perhaps way too risky?
I'd say that right now, Sam Bankman-Fried fits the mold of a person who everyone wants to believe in. And that image that is projected is something that a lot of people want to buy into because they feel like they when they give money to something like this are being part of something that is going to become something great. And I've seen this before with people who I've previously written about who have been accused of fraud or who have been, done some funky economics at their companies that have led to disaster. They all are incredibly likable and incredibly charismatic people, and they have their own sort of quirks and nuances that makes you be drawn to them more. And of all the people who I've covered in this space, Sam seems to be the largest character of this mold, where he's raised the most amount of money. He was acquired the most amount of belief from the communities that he's built. And right now, it appears that it's anyone's guess to see where this goes next.
Can I ask just about the criminal? Any, you know, obviously nothing's been decided, but what is it that has gotten the attention of investigators, authorities, that he did that would perhaps, actually break the law?
So right now, the big question mark over whether he broke the law is whether customer deposits were used from FTX and funneled or directed to the hedge fund arm at Alameda, and whether those customer deposits were then, put into speculative bets or other investments, which is something that, typical banks and exchanges are regulated against doing. It's a huge no-no. So that's what, is currently being looked at. The only sort of issue right now is there's a little bit of opacity right now around how and what authority the US agencies have to look into this, because FTX itself was domiciled in the Bahamas, and then Alameda is also overseas as well. FTX does have a US arm, so there's an in there, but it's again a huge question mark over how this will play out.
You use the word cult in the story, David, and we know that certain people are prone to joining cults and also being very good ambassadors for bringing others into the cult. Was that the case here? Because I know we're all picking on Sam Bankman-Fried for obvious reasons, but he's part of an ecosystem.
What we do know, and what sources have told us, and my colleagues and I, is that there was a small circle of friends around Sam that seemed to be incredibly close. And, if there was a window into what was occurring, that these people would likely know. That included his CEO at Alameda, Carolyn Allison, and his other colleague, Nishad Singh. There's other people, executives as well, who left, but there was definitely a small circle of people who were around Sam.
So what is next on the radar that you would be looking for at this point? Is this a story that warrants more digging for you, David?
Yep. With my colleagues, Sarah Emerson and Rich Nieva, we're going to continue looking at what's occurring right now, and what the fallout is going to be. We're continuing to look at other people who are involved at FTX and the affiliated companies and who knew what when. And I think that it's going to be very interesting to see how this story plays out. It's a very global story. They had offices across the world, and there's a lot more work for us to do. So stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Thanks very much, David.